First of all, let me start by saying that the nomenclature black loyalist actually imposes another famous on us, the white loyalist. Maybe we can even go backwards and talk about the white Jacobins as in the black Jacobins of Sierra James. I use this as my entry point because in 1960, James wrote, quote, "Up to 1918, blacks as a whole played no particular role in world politics. The world was not conscious of them except as objects. Blacks were not conscious of themselves. A spirit of frustration, jubilation, rebellion is not political consciousness," unquote. I mean, this is surprisingly coming from Sierra James, the Marxist Troxler who wrote Black Jacobins. Now, if what happened in Sandoma, 80, was not political consciousness, I don't know what political consciousness is. Slaves taking up arms, revolting, asking for their rights to be treated as freedmen, that is not political consciousness. I'm sorry to say, James was wrong there. The first attempt by blacks to enter world history could have been in Sandoma, but the struggle in Sandoma continued for about 13 years, from 1791-92 to 1804. Now, what happened in Freetown was different. Here were a group of Africans from America, then Canada, and then to Freetown, and they decided that they wanted to build institutions of their own that they could use to govern themselves. It did not happen. They failed. But their failure was not very easy. Their failure was animated through the consciousness that that failure actually gave rise to. So in other words, what I'm saying is that these are two historical moments where blacks, as blacks, entered the world historical state to make a point. The first was in 80. The second was in Sierra Leone. 80 took 13 years. In Sierra Leone, it took less than 2 years. Now, both revolutions in the end did not move beyond what they were originally planned to do, but they laid the foundation for a new society that was supposed to take over from there. How do I begin to tease this out? When you look at the history of Freetown in the 19th century, what normally comes out is not what the Nova Scotians have done. Freetown has been reduced to the history of those who came after the Nova Scotians, i.e. the so-called liberated Africans. We are told that it was the liberated Africans that made Freetown. That is not correct. Those who actually made Freetown were the Nova Scotians. To begin with, the church, the religion that they brought with them, was not only revolutionary in terms of its interpretation, but the basis on which it actually brought fellowship amongst those who came out. These were not exiles. These were people who felt homely. They wanted to come back home. And let us, don't forget, this was not a movement that was put together by the British. No. This was a movement that was put together by those who came out to say, what you promised us in Nova Scotia, you couldn't deliver. Now is the time for us to go back. And when Thomas Peters and others came out to make those demands, they were not talking because they were black. They were not talking because they were in Nova Scotia. They were talking as human beings. And that humanity which actually came out from the way they came out to stand for their right in America was what continued throughout the 19th century in Freetown. And it expressed itself in several ways. It went beyond race, it went beyond class, and it embraced and was wrapped around the question of citizenship, rights, as against the rights of those who thought they built the society in Freetown. There is evidence of political consciousness in what happened in Freetown, as well as what happened in Saint-Domingue, because what they wanted to do and what they were building, or what they attempted to build, was an independent society, outside white frame, constructed based on how they saw themselves. And how they saw themselves came out from the ideas that they got from America, ideas that were mixed with French emancipatory discourse. But these were applied to their own conditions, which was slavery, dependency, and lack of what could have made them, quote-unquote, humans. Now, when the Nova Scotians landed in Freetown, of course, there had been another settlement before they came, but it failed. It was only the Nova Scotians that succeeded in rolling out what could be called the next phase of the colonization project in Sierra Leone. But here are two readings going on at the same time. You have the whites, the company officials, and the British officials who wanted to build a colony. And then, on the other hand, you have people like Thomas Peters, David George, and their followers who wanted an independent state. Now, of course, the British would not allow an independent state. But these were issues that were never tabled. They acted as if they were dictating. And those terms, they wanted the Nova Scotians to accept. They did not accept, and that is where the problem started. So, it was the Nova Scotians and their descendants, not the Maroons or the Black British, those whom the British disparately referred to as Black folk, who laid the basis for the modernity which Freetown exudes. It was their radical and dissenting, splintering Methodism, not the benevolence of the state-led missionary society, which ironically provided the objective basis for a common fellowship and unity across Christian faith. It was the Nova Scotians and their descendants not the newly arrived liberated Africans. Sorry, it was the Nova Scotians and their descendants that the newly arrived liberated Africans copied their Christianity, education, industrial and occupational skills. We are key links in their induction into modernity. Nova Scotian chapels and schools were transformative institutional forms through which liberated Africans were socialized and nurtured. It needs to be emphasized that 19th century Freetown society and culture was not made in the villages by the Idesians, the Igbo, the Eba, the Ife, the Moko, the Popo, a town on the periphery of Freetown, and the mountain and the seasides of Waterloo, Hastings, Gloucester, Leicester, and Regent. 19th century Freetown society, the original city, was a pristine urban settlement peopled by and infused with a cosmopolitan borders that baffled outsiders. Its unquestionable modernity, mistakenly dubbed Westernization, owes its origin to the cultural hegemony of the Nova Scotians. This was the foundation on which Creole love, respectability, property rights, independence, strong women was built. It was no doubt an extension of what Bureaus called the Black Atlantic. The spirit of resistance which contoured much of 19th century freedom arguably issued from several streams. From the epic resistance over the imposition of the Quitwens, however, looked black. Read as unfair and unjust taxation imposed by the racist Governor Glassy, who was being given much credit that he doesn't deserve, the Nova Scotians put up a stout resistance against what they saw as a betrayal of the ideas of freedom that animated and contoured the original idea that gave birth to the movement which eventually became the settlement. It was Thomas Peters, not Clarkson, who was their hero. College Chapel, their beloved place of worship, still proclaims their Negroes on its wall. Their invaluable contribution to the settlement and its sustainability traverses education, culture, language, history. But their greatest mark on the settlement was their cultural resistance and their fierce and truculent defense of their individual and cultural rights and freedom as civilized citizens of the world. The genealogy of their notion and consciousness of right journeyed from their struggle for their inalienable rights imported from America, first as slaves, to the War of Independence, and eventually its application against company tyranny, which eventually morphed into the notion of citizenship and the right of the freeborn citizen. In the long route, it morphed into a moral economy of the everyday, within which was described the tolerable and the intolerable. The right, what subsequently became the right of the freeborn Creole citizen, is as old as the original settlement said. It is on its rights, and on it rests the greatest gift the Nova Scotians gave to the original settlement. The history of 19th century Atlantic freedom would certainly have been different, completely different, if the Nova Scotian input was absent. To remake freedom and to understand freedom as the anchor that it was for the modernity that spread across West Africa in the 19th and 20th century, we have to turn back to the history of the Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Is he missing? Mr. Technician, what happened? Is he gone? Are you still there? Oh.
I'm here.
Okay, and so because of the Zoom situation, I'm gonna, if anyone has any questions for Ibrahim to ask, we'll maybe just field 2 questions, or maybe you want to think about it. If there's a mic, there's a hand there, sir. Please use the mic. Put your, yeah. Or they could, okay, no worries, thank you.
Yes, morning everyone. Dr. Ibrahim, I got the impression from your presentation that the focus of the struggle for better life in Sierra Leone was centered around the Nova Scotians, the the blacks in Sierra Leone from Nova Scotia. What explains that the other Sierra Leoneans, the indigenous Sierra Leoneans, so to speak, were not, I got the impression, you could clarify, were not integrally involved in that struggle with the Nova Scotia blacks? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for this. It's normally the case that when Africans or when people move from one place to the other, and when things turn out to be different in terms of colonization, the question of the indigenous people always comes in. I mean, we raise this question with regards to what happened in America when America was constituted. We know that America is not the immigrant state that it claims it is. It's a settler state. Equally, we could use the same black settler paradigm to understand Liberian Saigon. Now, the case of Saigon, I mean, let me define Saigon to begin with. We are not talking about Saigon as we know it today, no. We are talking about a portion which is not even the size of the present city today, the western area in Freetown. So we are talking about the place where the mercantile nations of Britain, France, called the watering place, where ships stopped to do victuals and then move on. Now, that was where they settled. The first settlement actually paid money for that space. It was bought. The Nova Scotians did not have to go through that deal. They just occupied what was available and tried to expand. Now, were there indigenous people around? Yes, of course. You couldn't have built such a society in where there were ships always passing through without, first of all, having an agreement with those who resided there. So yes, the indigenous people mixed with the Nova Scotians. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Nova Scotians came with an understanding of the world that was different from the people they met here. They couldn't have survived here without learning from those they met here. So definitely there was an interaction, a vibrant interaction that made it possible for them to exist without any major battle or fight in terms of colonization, taking of land. No, it did not happen here. So the question of saying it was black colonialism wouldn't come in the conversation, because here was a group that came back voluntarily. They wanted to do something and they were not allowed to do it because the British have their own project of making them do what they want. They failed, and in the end, what they brought back, their culture, their ways of doing things, gave rise to a society that continued the spirit and ideals that animated their coming back home. In other words, what I'm saying is that without the presence of the Nova Scotians here, in terms of what they brought, the ideal of freedom, of their humanity vis-a-vis the humanity of the whites, the history of 19th century freedom, which is now written as if it was the liberated Africans that did XYZ, would not have happened.
All right. Thank you. There's one more question.
Professor Ibrahim, forgive me, I'm not quite sure of the history in the context of the history and the question I'm about to ask you. So you will perhaps need to contextualize it much better. Fragments of stuff that I've picked up over the years. First question, how the name Freetown came about? Secondly, do you know anything about the history of the trees that were brought from free Africans in Jamaica and Barbados that was planted in Freetown? What is the story of the tree and why it's so important?
Okay, let me start with the second question about the tree. I don't know anything about that. I would like to learn about that tree. The first question, can you just run it by me again? Because the way you framed it, I mean, I would like to hear it also, please.
The history of Freetown, how it got its name, who demands that it should be called Freetown?
Okay. It is believed, the Nova Scotians were not even the second settlement, they were the third settlement. The first was the so-called Black Hawk from the UK. And mark you, evidence now available suggests that some of them could have been from America. But a lot of them were internal to Britain, and most of them were on the edge of society, marginalized, destitute, etc. Now they came because they were misled in terms of what was there or what was here, and the timing of their arrival and the rains May, June, it made it impossible for this settlement to survive. Now, the question of the free. So I would just like to say, do you know about any other country in Africa that has a capital city that is Freetown? Most people don't know. But Gabon, Libreville, is Freetown. Yeah. Now, that notion of free, alleged, came from Sharp and others. Now, why did they christen the place Freetown? Because the ideal that animated the movement, independent of company officials, independent of British officials, was about freedom. The cotton tree that 5 months ago came down in the city of Freetown was supposed to be the place where they met to give thanks. Now, everything they did before they left Nova Scotia was about, we are ridding ourselves of this yoke. We were promised land in Nova Scotia. We went there, it did not happen. Now we are making another try. But now we are not going to somebody's land, we are going to our own land. This would interest you that some of those people who came back actually came to where they were taken as captives. Some of them have been recorded to have left the settlement and moved to the interior where they were able to meet those that they left behind. It happened again under the Liberated African scheme. When some of them came again, they left the settlement and they were able to meet others they had left. Now, of course, you could raise the question, no, some of them Those who actually left here and went to America, and Thomas Peters supposedly came from Nigeria, but we have evidence of people who were actually captured around this area. The point I'm trying to make is that even if the question of the naming of Freetown had come from white folks, what? Freetown is an English word. Free is an English word. But they captured the movement of the time, i.e., these are people who were coming back home, and the only thing that could describe this kind of thing is they have attained what they wanted, moving away from colonialism. But they were wrong. Freetown, in the view of the company and the British, was not a freedom project. It was a colonial project. And that is why the Nova Scotians attempted to do it the way they only saw rights, i.e. freedom. They failed, but their failure sparked a movement that ran through the history of 19th century Freetown, i.e. the resistance that came out of that movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you so much for your contributions coming to us from across the Atlantic. We do appreciate it. We're going to move on in the interest of time. Graham, were you able to set that up? We're going to go with Afua Cooper and Graham Nickerson. I'm working on something called the Thomas Peters Project, so it's really a nice segue into our discussion where I am looking at, we've located 11 sites where Thomas Peters lived, worked, and traveled to, and talk about a new approach. We are our GIC mapping these sites, so when you click on, say, Fredericton or St. John, New Brunswick, the petition that Thomas Peters wrote there will come up in manuscript form, and then I'm also gonna get it transcribed so it's readable. So I think we just wanna say who Thomas Peters was based on, with this discussion, the first one we had. Thomas Peters was a black loyalist. He was enslaved in Louisiana, then he made his way, or was sold up to North Carolina, joined the British during the American Revolutionary War, enlisted in the Black Pioneers, and went with the British over the course of the next 6 years at various points, Philadelphia. He was at the siege of Charleston in Savannah. British lost the war, and these large cohort of black loyalists ended up in New York port, and they were evacuated. Thousands of them were returned to their slave owners, but 3,000 were evacuated from New York port to the Maritimes. Peters was one of those ships that left in November 1783 with his family. The Black Pioneers also traveled as a group. That's another thing that we're teasing out. People like Todd Braystead, who's a military historian, but they traveled as a group from America on those ships to the Maritimes, right? So Thomas Peters traveled his family, traveled with the Black Pioneers like Murphy Steele. So they fought together, they worked together, they had lines together, they came to Canada together, lived in communities like Annapolis Royal and Digby together. Some of them moved over to New Brunswick together, so very interesting. But the promises that the British reneged on their promises. The Black Loyalists, many of them were suffering. Read Boston King's narrative. Peters was appointed as their representative to go to England to please their cause to the British government. He did so in 1790. On the Sierra Leone project, the idea for Sierra Leone came up. Peters came back to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, tramped across these areas, gathering support. People were interested, people wanted to leave. And in 1792, January, close to 1,200 people left here from this harbor here on 15 ships. and went to Sierra Leone. Once in Sierra Leone, they also realized that just like in the Maritimes, the British were going to renege on their promises. And as Dr. Abdullah said, they fought, resisted. So even though they were on the side of the crown during the war, their idea was freedom. That was their mandate. They would have gone to the moon if it meant they could live as free people. And they said in Sierra Leone, this is the land of our forefathers. We are not leaving here. The governor said to them at one time, rather cheekily, do you want to go back to Nova Scotia? They're like, no, we're staying here. We're going to fight it out. We're going to get our freedom. We want to establish this state. And there was one time when one of them said, actually, you know, we're Africans and you whites are not, so you're the ones who should leave. And it went into an armed uprising in 1800s. That's what Dr. Abdullah was talking about, how, you know, the British crushed the uprising, but it laid the foundation, the basis for, you know, the democracy that was kind of unknown in the wider region. For example, in 1797, women in the colony of Freetown, Sierra Leone, had the vote. But when the British became entrenched and so on, they took away, the white people took away the vote from the black women. But that was to just tell you how open-minded they were and how far-thinking they were. 1797, women in Freetown were voting. And so Thomas Peters was, you know, one of the leaders at that who challenged the British. Remember, he fought for them in the Revolutionary War. In the Maritimes, he was challenging them. In Africa, he was also challenging them. So we're looking at this Thomas Peters project. Should we stand up? Maybe I should get a mic or use one of the mics. Oh yeah, but I need to look at it. Thank you. So we said that Thomas Peters was a Yoruba prince. That's kind of come down in history. We're kind of not sure, but if you read many of the works of people on Peters, they said he's Nigerian, he's Yoruba. So if you click on that Nigeria, the #1 spot, which is where we found him. Gonna click on it, Graham, or are we just gonna? No. Okay, so then #2 now. So he's captured. He becomes a survivor of the Middle Passage. He is in North America. He's in Louisiana. That period too is a kind of bit foggy. We know that he traveled on this slave ship called Henri Cat to Louisiana, to New Orleans, ended up there, ran away many times. He was sold up to Wilmington, North Carolina. So if you look, you click on it, that comes up. Do we have any with the petitions, Graham? The petition in manuscript form. So we're really looking at this history in a different way to make it more engaging, especially to young people. We're always talking about the youth, so we get the youths to learn history. Well, this is one way. So there's a whole thing happening here. It's an interdisciplinary approach. We're doing mapping. Graham actually in one life was a marine scientist and a map maker. He still is. He's now doing his PhD in history, Black Loyalist history at University of New Brunswick. If we go up, #4, so he escapes in 1707 from slavery. Remember, the British had promised freedom to enslaved African Americans who joined them, different identities, now, African, British, African American, or British subject. So he joins the Black Pioneers and the Guides, and he's with them for the next 6 years. As I said, I was at the siege of Savannah, Georgia, where he met his wife, Sally Peters. She was also enslaved. She escaped from a plantation on Cooper's River in South Carolina to the British, and there they met and they got married. So this is gonna be up online. We're creating, I call it Thomas Peters Project. It's gonna be a Thomas Peters archive. Thomas Peters, I call him a Black Atlantic revolutionary, because here's this man, fought as a revolutionary, came to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. He actually left Nova Scotia, went to New Brunswick, came back again to Nova Scotia and would not relent. He would not relent. He thought, was sent to Britain by his community, so many families, and when they left New York on this ship called Joseph, it was a hurricane season in November. They were blown off course and ended up in Bermuda. So they stayed in Bermuda the entire winter, and then they came to Annapolis Royal in when did they arrive? In May 1784. So if we could look at maybe the last one, because I'm going to wrap it up now. So he's gone to Bermuda, and in 1792, January 15th, they left. Every time I come down this harbor and walk on the waterfront, I remember the 15 ships that left here to Sierra Leone. The British government paid for it. And in fact, the governments of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick did not want them to go. You know, they treated the people so terribly, and knowing it was time for the people to go, they didn't want them to go, and they did put a lot of obstacles in their path, but they succeeded. So this is what we're doing. If you go back down, look at that primary document, the settlement on the coast of Africa. It's gone again. Bring it down, please. It was a poster that was posted all over New Brunswick and this province, Nova Scotia, advertising that free settlement on the coast of Africa. And so, talking about different identities. One time they're British subjects, they're Black Loyalists, and Nova Scotians, and as their identities transformed to Africans, beginning Africans, ending as Africans. So I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to put everything, it's going to be up online at some point. Thank you very much. And then Graham, Graham has an individual? Okay. Sure.
It's here and ready.
Okay.
Should I go on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You don't mind? Oh my goodness. Okay.
You want Carol to go and then you go get
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you go and
So we're gonna have Dr. Troxler to go.
There was a network of collusion to seize individual black loyalists, and then document them, quote unquote, if in case a court should challenge their ownership, and of course sell them away to buyers who were already waiting. And I'm sorry, but that is my rich but it's alarm. It's not a phone call because I had it turned off, but it's an alarm that I'm supposed to call somebody who's going to help me with know more about guys talking. I set the timer when I thought I would be free, and I was just totally off there, and I apologize for that. Okay, I got to clear up here. Okay, so there's this network of people, and this is really what caught Postel in the Sheldon court. This little network of local people who covered for one another when they were sued by people who were seeking their freedom. And overall in Nova Scotia, the network included Michael Wallace, who you saw, you saw there. Michael Wallace was a Halifax merchant, and he would be very soon the acting lieutenant governor of Nova Scotia. Just a very powerful man, and he is in on this ring, not locally in Shelburne, but throughout the province. And his hand is obvious in the kidnapping of 2 members of a provincial corps at the settlement in Country Harbor, and also the wives of those 2 members. Now, I did not know that these 2 members of the corps were of African ancestry until I saw them showing up in court suing for for their freedom, saying that they and their wives had gone to Halifax from Country Harbor and had been kidnapped and were in the process of being sold to a ready buyer in the West Indies. So that made me wonder how many more people in those 3 southern provincial corps at Country Harbor were black, because there's no recording of race in the muster rolls for those 3 provinces, either in Nova Scotia or in East Florida or during the war. And there's no recording of race at Country Harbor when the lots are distributed. All of the privates got the same amount of land, 100 acres, which of course was a lot more, at least double what black loyalists got everywhere. Now, after this happened in the Country Harbor kidnapping, and those guys got away. They were free to go on their way. The court rescued them. But after that happened, we think that's when some of the black people in Country Harbor moved to other settlements that were forming elsewhere in Guysborough County, Antigonish County, and Pictou County. There's an oral tradition of Country Harbor people going to those places, and certainly on the basis of what I've just told you, one can well understand how they went there. And leaving their land is a good stopping point for me, because black communities today in Nova Scotia are having some success in establishing and clarifying titles to land that has been passed for generations, some of it dating back to grants to black loyalists. That's been a long-standing issue. And in 2017, there's legislation called the Land Titles Initiative. It's slowly churning through. How successful it will be and how long it will take for it to be successful is yet to be seen. But it's interesting that this contemporary land issue goes back in some cases to grants to black loyalists.
Graham, you ready? I'm gonna have folks.
You guys ready?
Yeah. So Graham, in the interest of time, you have 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. We're gonna go here.
Okay.
Okay. So, I'm Graham Nickerson, and I'm here with my PowerPoint. So basically, I'm gonna just preface the latter part of my PowerPoint with basically looking at the Shelburne riots and the collapse of the Shelburne riots to race and collapsing of Black Loyalist history in public, at least, to Birchtown. And then how that sort of simplifies the dialogue and the history and, you know, removes a level of complexity, I think, that exists within Black Loyalist society and between Black Loyalist society and white Southerner society, and also First Nation society. One thing I want to point out, we've talked about David George. So you see the place that David George exists in Sierra Leone and Black Loyalist culture. There's no commemoration to David George in Shelburne. We kind of know where his church was, but there's no real protection in place to prevent it from being bulldozed and developed. And in fact, Shelburne Township is facing financial difficulties, and one of the solutions is to sell off original Black Loyalist land and develop it. So the problem there, and I'll try and segue into some of this, is until recently we didn't even know what to look for, right? We didn't identify what Black Loyalists are, what their culture looks like, who's a Black Loyalist, who isn't, the historical progress of Black Loyalist habitation of the town in Shelburne as opposed to just Birchtown, and other communities outside of Shelburne and Birchtown. And so we wouldn't even know. And probably in terms of material culture, people would see beads and things and go like, oh, that's indigenous, right? So if you're not even knowing what to look for, how do you know what's worth saving or commemorating? So this is sort of to try and show my outline, which I'm going to briefly hop through. And sort of, okay, so looking at like the Black Loyalist myth and how it gets collapsed and how the time of it gets in the, and sort of the public eye is like, it all happens in a weekend and everyone goes back to see it, right? It just, there is a whole lot of things that happen and it just sort of like, if you go to Shelburne, like, there is an absence of that history. And that's something Andrea will speak about. There are a lot of other factors, and when you if you step away from Shelburne and Birchtown, and look at the communities, histories, and Black people in those communities, you see, lots of factors impacting Black Loyalist society and movement, and equally, white Loyalist society. In my youth, like, white Loyalists were portrayed as like almost like barons. Everyone's a land baron who comes in, the upper echelons of society. It's the Loyalist capital of the universe. And then you realize that that's not the case. And in my research, when you look at multiple sources, you start to see the cracks in Loyalist society, between Loyalist society and planner society, and those sorts of things. So we really have to consider all of those things. And all of these pressures are boiling during the summer of 1784. And what happens, you get 300 late arrivals of Loyalists who are tradespeople, the Black Brigade, other paramilitaries who show up. And so it's not just about wages, although that is how it's been coached. It's about skill and people who, and you can look at secondary sources and see, it's like, who made the best pioneers? White candlestick makers, not Black carpenters. And you look at the sources from Barrington Township and Crowell, for instance. So then we have, how do we reclaim this? Well, it's composite history, right? We have to look at all the sources and try and compile and put things on timelines and connect things that are related, and that's where we are now, I think, is trying, and especially with looking at the story map, is like following people around and seeing what things are happening. So one of the community I look at, and actually it's Harvey Monty Whitfield, who at a presentation at UNB talking about, are you an activist or a historian? And I think for me it's methodological advocacy of like how we do the history, how like stepping away from preconceptions of the victim narrative, for instance. But also, where do we hang all of these random pieces of noise, random pieces of information, so that we can compile them? Because as a historian of Black history, you are always running across like things and it's like, man, I'd love to look at this, but I can't. But it's important, and I don't want to walk away from it and have it be 20 years before somebody else looks at this again. So hanging these things up, because community cares, right? Community cares. So BANG is a project that I'm hoping will be my dissertation. I've been known to change my mind once or twice, but so elements of this, and these are all sort of community-facing projects. I'll try and brush through them, but I put a lot of effort in, and my PowerPoints keep going away somewhere. So I will quickly go through this. So this is a National Trust site, National Trust for Canada. We have visit lists there that if you go and look, you'll see there are Black history sites through the Maritimes, even Labrador, WH's site. And so you can plan your visit list or your visits to Nova Scotia, Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, and see history about people like us. Then there is BANG proper, which is trying to hang all of these sort of random stories, and I probably have like 1 minute left, or 2 minutes. So, and that is looking at things like King's tie. So when you look at King's College tie to slavery, there's an entire white network of people who are associated with this. And so I started to look at King's, and it's like, oh my God, there's white slave holders all up and down the St. John River Valley, and I want to map them out. So that's just a start, but it is to try and look at how populations change and move based on their circumstances. And then on the left, my left, is basically trying to database all of the legislation and even records of social attitudes towards race that I can then, if you can imagine watching these moving around and seeing deviations from the expected, and looking here to see what policies change, trade, say there's a riot somewhere, and going, oh, like there's a reason why people left, and this is likely the reason. So that's kind of, and all of this stuff is public facing. So community can also access this. Because one of the problems is with academics, or not academics, but academia and our products, is that no one from community can get to them. Because it's expensive, and oftentimes there are those social barriers that make people feel uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I know it's Andrea Davis, the CEO at the Birchtown Museum.
Somebody in the back give me a warning so that Dr. Cooper doesn't have to, just because I don't want to be nervous when he gets down to the last 4 minutes or 3 minutes. So as you know, I'm Andrea Davis. I was born in Shelburne a long time ago. I left Shelburne when I was 19 and I moved on to Ontario, and I lived there for 32 years, and I just came back to Shelburne last year. I came back because the ancestors were calling me back. because there was a lot of work still left to do. So I figured that I would come back and do that. So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Cooper for allowing me to speak here today. I am amongst academics. I am not an academic, but I do have a degree from the University of Life and Experience. So I have 3 children and a grandson. So I hope I don't cast a shadow on all the work that they do. I'm going to read you a composition that I kind of wrote specifically for this, so I hope it's not too corny. If it is, by all means, you can just leave if you'd like. Oh, how you have suffered. Oh, how you have thrived. Oh, how you have provided. How have you survived? You accepted our ancestors in special unity. You were once known as the largest free black community. When fighting took place known as the First Race Riot, sadly, this did not make you quiet. When our people were pushed to your astounding embrace, you made the best of the worst, withholding their disgrace. You were not ready to receive their traditions and ways. With over 3,000 strong, they weathered the days. Your land was rocky and food was rare. Most of the days were spent in despair. A home made of sticks with a hole in the ground? Is this the freedom that only they found? I'd rather be home than to live on this cold, dark land. So together they stood up and they made a stand. They left your land on 15 ships with their freedom to own and landed on homeland known as Sierra Leone. Your grounds were dug up, which proved we were there. Artifacts, facts, facts, we are still here. Although they were not meant to survive, your resiliency and determination helped them thrive. You are now home of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center, and your land has taken on the role of mentor. So many come here to research your story in hopes of one day bringing us glory. You have never let us down. Your land is our place. Thank you, O Birchtown, for giving us this space. This is about Birchtown. You kind of roll up some of the films. Actually, they covered everything, so mine is just about us at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. And the mission statement of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Birchtown is a commitment to discovery, interpretation, safeguarding, and promoting the history and heritage of the Black Loyalists and their descendants. There's going to be a lot of slides that spoke to more of what they did. But the Black Loyalist Heritage Center tells the story of the world's largest free African population outside of Africa and the world. The center also has the ability to tell stories of modern-day slavery. This community museum and historic site is here to provide the space to share authentic stories and house unique collections that proudly highlight the rich history of the Black Loyalists. Museums are places to research, collect, conserve, interpret, and exhibit both tangible and intangible heritage. They also foster diversity and sustainability by being accessible and inclusive. Museums are educational centers where people can learn about the world around them, past and present, through public programming, activities, workshops, and conferences. They also provide sources of information, which must be authentic and their provenance clear. Museums are no longer a place where forgotten artifacts go to enjoy their final years. They address the key social issues to transform how we see the future and how we can shape our society. But most of all, they are a gathering space, a safe space, a grief centers, and a place to go when healing is needed. They are community. From the Museum's Next website, there are 5 reasons why we need museums now more than ever. Museums help us learn from the past. Museums bring community together. Museums stand firm in the face of adversity. Museums are hubs for digitization, innovation, and interaction. And museums educate future generations. Over the past year, as the executive director for the Black Loyalist Heritage Center, I have received several requests for information from academics working toward the PhD or some other form of academic achievement. The one thing that is rarely asked is information from us, the descendants, the humans behind the story, the real deal. While not to cause friction on this topic of studies of slavery, Dr. Cooper, so we'll give you a heads up here, I've often wondered if the continued educational strive on the investigation of communities only perpetrates the storytelling of the oppressor, keeping it alive, reminding us of a time where pain has no healing. Perhaps that's me overthinking. But I often wonder, what is in it for us? The shelves of our Lindsay Library at the Black Lotus Heritage Center are not lined with finished work of those who have completed their educational achievement. Why not? Again, that's me overthinking. Or am I? I would like to offer that the Black Lotus Heritage Center in Birchtown dedicate a space in our library to anyone wishing to pursue their PhD or any other academic paper. We want you to come to us, work with us, see us, feel us, talk to us, so that we can be part of the process, part of the story, and part of the future. After all, it's not about us without us. In closing, as an 8th generation descendant of the Black Loyalists with 2 ancestors directly from the Book of Negroes, Jupiter Farmer and Titus Milliner, I am happy to see so many people wanting to share this space, have these conversations, and be willing to work together to ensure that we don't repeat the tragedy of this dark history in time. I didn't have the opportunity to learn about history of the Black Loyalists while growing up in Shelburne. We never talked about it. I never learned it in school. Our parents didn't talk about it. It just wasn't something that was discussed. But I wore it every day. My skin showed who I was. And my skin was not my sin. But I did move away. I felt a need for me to leave Shelburne and to pursue other things. And I did that. I had my children in Ontario. I worked for the government for 32 years. And then I retired and I decided to come back home. I want to let you know that in September of last year, I did an article for the New York Times. They came to us in Birchtown, and we talked about just that, about the lack of education in the system and how we, at our generation, didn't get to learn it. And I had a quote in there, which I'm probably after I read it. I want to ensure that this information is taught in the school system, even if I have to do it myself. So right now we have a couple of projects, and I think we're kind of at sort of the end of the presentation. We have a genealogy lab project. We just received funding from the government to actually pursue a genealogy lab. We need to find out who our people are. Okay, there's our guy's gonna move a couple of slides up if you don't mind. This is so necessary. We cannot rely on oral stories alone. We need digitization of our records. The Book of Negroes is another book, another piece of information. This talks about the race riots, which Graham already shared with you. So you just keep going. Thomas Peters, which is also covered by Dr. Cooper, the 15 ships. This is a map of, could you go back one? This is a map of Birchtown. I just want to let you know that Africans, Black Loyalists lived in Birchtown. So when they went on the Exodus in 1792, they sold their land. So the land actually was taken over by a lot of the white families. But they were once settled there as 3,000 black strong in the town of Birchtown. Okay? And these are some of the founding members of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. These are the folks that put it together back in 1989, and some of them are still with us today. The Heritage Society talks about it right there. I'll let you read for yourself, and you can just continue the last of the slides. In May, just one last thing, in May of 2023, this year, a member of the community from Halifax actually contacted me. At that time, I was tired. I didn't want any more calls. I didn't want any more stress. I didn't want talking to anyone. But I did take the call because that's what we do. I'm glad that I did, as it resulted in a letter-writing campaign to request the repatriation of the Book of Negroes, part of the original British headquarters papers from 1774 and 1783, also known as Carleton Papers. What has happened is that we are attempting to repatriate that document to bring it back to Birchtown where it belongs, because it lists our people. Right now it sits in a room in the museum in London. There's no access to that. I know this because the person that actually came to her father went to the museum to check it. And so we're attempting to get that book here where it belongs, back in Shelburne. So when spiders unite, they can tie down a lion. So thank you so much.
Out of time. However, if you want to stay back to ask questions and also based on the panelists as well, you can do that as well. So that's continue.
Yeah. Thanks, Chevy. Thank you, Andrea. If there's a burning question someone has, or someone want to make a comment, go ahead, please. This person here.
Hi, so I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I learned a lot personally just from being here. And I know Graham, you mentioned that there's a disconnect between academia and community, and I feel like I've experienced that even as I'm only pursuing my undergrad. I kind of see how what I'm studying and all these theories applies to people, but I feel like I'm in an ivory tower and I'm disconnected in a lot of ways, and it's kind of heartbreaking. So I kind of wanted to ask both of you how you think museums can bridge the gap between community and academia, and how you can kind of use museums to disseminate information to youth, especially those who are facing systemic barriers but don't understand where they're coming from, and they have to go to their parents alone to, explain community issues. So I just wanted to ask what your perspective was on that.
Okay, I guess I'm answering. Well, one for me, my personal philosophy is that part of the work product for me is community engagement, right? And advocating to community to understand, like, look what I learned, or there's this huge. Our people are everywhere, and we've done great things, and we need to lift ourselves up through the knowledge of who we are and what our past is and what our future trajectory is. And so for me, a lot of the reason for me pursuing a PhD is so I can be here, right? If there was no one from my community here, all the conversations that I've had with a number of people here already would not have happened. And that would limit our development in our view of what our museum should be doing. And thinking about like having a space for academics.
You can
coming up with a strategy. So if anyone else here can help and has some advice, developing some kind of strategy in which we are freely providing our history and experience and our geography. But on the other side of it is we don't want to have to go and pay for a journal subscription so that we can see the product. We also don't want to see our history represented or misrepresented in terms of like the Book of Negroes miniseries, in which a huge amount of creative. I don't know anyone here.
She wants you to go to the front of the room.
The riot and the way that was portrayed was incredibly offensive to us. And so it's a betrayal. And so we don't want those sort of situations to happen. And if they stop happening, we'll open up much more. And academia and community will both be better off for it.
Same thing. I mean, I just became a member of the museum last year, but my history has been with me forever. So stepping into that platform wasn't hard for me at all. I had to check myself because every day I walk onto the grounds of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center, I get emotional. It's every day. I get emotional. It's sacred ground. I can hear the building talking to me when I'm there alone, and I'm not scared. When I leave the building at night, I walk across the path to my car. I know that I'm protected. So I know that we have those safeguards in place. But if any of you were to check our website, we have an educational guide that we also have. We have a virtual link to our tour, which I'm trying to get set up here today. All of that stuff is there, all the information is there, and we do need the youth. I'd like to say that this year was the first year that I was able to hire descendants from the Black Loyalists as staff, and it was amazing, and they were young people. So if anybody wants to come down from Halifax and you want to work at the Black Loyalists, I have a big place. You're welcome to crash with me, just saying. But we're also interested in doing recruitments and everything as well. And I think right now we have something on our website in regards to looking for board members, and we're looking for you. So check out the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. And if you're in Halifax, you can still become a board member of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. Okay?
Thank you guys. I think we're gonna have one more question. Thank you.
And it's not a question.
Okay.
It's just a comment. I just want to thank you very much because on the advertisement for this event, you had the BCC, and I think it's important. It's not just an academic initiative.
Yeah.
It needs to include the community. Universities higher education, there is a little bit of a barrier for a lot of people who will not have access. And what's important is that community organizations like the BCC and others, it's important to include them because they are the frontliners to the community. Accessing the information becomes sometimes, like I said, it's intimidating for a lot of people to step on the grounds of a university. But the community organizations are the ones who can easily diffuse the information. But what's also important is that funding. A lot of community organizations have major difficulties in having funding. Universities are excellent at writing grants. You have an expertise in that, and that's where that support can come from as well, to help the organizations. And I'm so glad to see the BCC included in this initiative, because I think that's a great example of how you link the initiatives of the institutions within any given society, which basically underlines the fact that community organizations play an important role in diffusing information and educating the population. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the reminder that the BCC is and was an integral part of the organizing committee for sure. We started meeting 4 years ago in 2019. The conference was starting in 2021, didn't happen. Then 2022 didn't happen because of COVID. So yeah, from the get-go, the BCC means the Black Cultural Center of Nova Scotia, a community group, a museum group. And so yeah, that was uppermost in our minds about bridging the community and academia. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you. Let's clap one more time.